We never say enough what a shame death is. We will never realize quite clearly enough what a shameful thing death is. We never try, really, to fight it. In the end, we never try to fight it heads on. Doctors, scientists only practice with it. Doctors and scientists merely establish a pact with it. They fight on points of detail. They slow it down by a few months, a few years. But all amounts to nothing. They fight on details for a prolongation for a couple of months or a couple of years. But this is nothing. What we need is a big common effort to attack the problem. What we need to do is attack the roots of the problem in a big collective effort in which each of us will work towards his own survival and everyone else's. Everybody works for his own over life and for the one of others. That is why it is necessary that one of us gives the example. That is why, because one of us has to give an example, I decided to harness myself to the project that's been close to my heart for a long time. I decided to start the project which for a long time captured me, to conserve myself totally, to keep marks of all the moments of our life, of all the objects we met, of all we said and what was said in our presence. Preserving one's whole, keeping a trace of all the moments of our lives, all the objects that have surrounded us, everything we have said and what's been said of us. That's my goal. That's my task. It's a big one, and my means are weak. The task is vast, and my means are frail. Why didn't I start before? Why didn't I start before? Almost everything of the period I tried to salvate was lost, thrown away by guilt and neglect. Almost everything dealing with the period that I first set about saving has been lost, thrown away through culpable negligence. It's only the big efforts I could find the few elements I present here. It was only with infinite difficulty that I was able to find the few elements that I present here. To prove their authenticity, situated exactly, was only possible through inquiries and non-stop questioning. To prove their authenticity, to situate them precisely, all this has been possible only as the result of ceaseless questioning and minutely detailed research. But the effort still to be made is great. But the effort will be tremendous, and a lot of years will pass by with research, study, clarification, before my life will be in security, carefully ordered, labeled, in a sure place, protected of thief, fire, and the bomb. So many years will be spent searching, studying, classifying before my life is secured, carefully arranged and labeled in a safe place, secure against thief, fire, and the nuclear war, from whence it will be possible to take it out and assemble it at any point. And out of it, it should be possible to reconstitute it at any moment. The canonized that I don't have today, I can finally take a rest. Then, being assured of never dying, I may finally rest. Paris, May 1969.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Getty Center. My name is Glenn Phillips, and I'm the curator of modern and contemporary collections at the Getty Research Institute. And I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's panel discussion on Reconsidering Harald Szeemann. This is Harald Szeemann on the screen. This is Harald Szeemann at another point in his life. And I think mostly tonight we're going to be looking at moments in between these two moments. Szeemann was a very complex figure and someone who was incredibly famous in Europe, and I think really almost a celebrity in Europe, though he never became quite as well known in the United States, although he certainly provided really crucial support to a lot of American artists in many of his projects. But over a 50-year career that spanned hundreds of projects, he only did a couple in the United States. We'll hear about one of those later tonight. And it did happen quite late in his career. And his career went through many phases. In the US, we might first of all think of Szeemann as the curator of the legendary exhibition When Attitudes Become Form. This was the 1969 exhibition at the Kunsthalle Bern that surveyed developments in Northern and Southern Europe and the East Coast and West Coast of the United States, combining in one project a few different strands of conceptual art, arte povera, minimalism and post-minimalism, land art, process art, into an unwieldy and scandalous exhibition that overstuffed its galleries to the point that there was really nowhere for a visitor to stand or to be in the exhibition. And many people saw the project as attacking the museum itself, quite literally. Here's Richard Serra splashing hundreds of pounds of molten lead on the walls, Lawrence Weiner removing a section of wall, Joseph Beuys spreading 400 pounds of margarine in the corners, Michael Heiser destroying the plaza in front of the museum to make his burn depression. Here's Robert Morris's piece, where every day you add some more oil-soaked rags and other flammable materials to the pile on the floor. And I love this photo. Every single person in this photograph is smoking. Attitudes led to Szeemann's dismissal from the Kunsthalle Bern and set him on a path of being an independent curator who would do projects at museums all over Europe and other parts of the world. Although from the late 70s onward, he did maintain an association with the Kunsthaus Zurich that continued for most of the rest of his career. Szeemann's other very famous project from this period is dOCUMENTA 5 in 1972. dOCUMENTA is, of course, the mega exhibition that takes place in Kassel, Germany, every 5 years. Szeemann's dOCUMENTA was called Questioning Reality, Image Worlds Today. This is the catalog from the exhibition with the cover designed by Ed Ruscha. It would take almost an hour, I think, to describe the full thrust of this exhibition, which included not only a survey of contemporary art, but also sections on advertising and propaganda, science fiction, art of the mentally ill, artist-designed museums. But like When Attitudes Become Form, dOCUMENTA 5 was another instance of a highly controversial exhibition, terribly criticized at the time, and which is now seen as one of our most important exhibitions. Here are just a couple more images. I'm overwhelming you with images because we're overwhelmed with images here with this archive. I think for most people who know a little bit more about Szeemann, their knowledge might then jump ahead about 25 years to the time when Szeemann became a central curator in the proliferation of international biennials around the world. Here are images of the 1999 and 2001 Venice Biennales. Szeemann was curator of both of them in a row. But those intervening years, those sort of 25 years in between, are also a fascinating period. He spent 10 years, for instance, from 1973 to 83, working primarily just on 3 major exhibitions that reevaluated the modernism of the early 20th century, reclaiming some of the radicalism of that period. In the exhibition Monte Verita, for instance, modernism becomes a story about anarchists, communists, theosophists, nudists, vegetarians, homosexuals, and modern dancers who gathered in a community around Lake Ascona in the Italian part of Switzerland where Szeemann lived. And we'll hear a little bit more about that exhibition later tonight. Later in the 1980s, Szeemann became a curator of major single artist retrospectives such as Mario Merz, Cy Twombly, Joseph Beuys. And he also worked on a series of exhibitions that, kind of going back to arte povera roots, explored this really formalist poetics of sculpture, often in these large, reclaimed industrial spaces. I think these are some of the periods of his career that are most in need of reevaluation. And beginning in 1992, he also embarked on another trilogy of exhibitions that combined his ideas with re-radicalizing modern art with surveys of contemporary art seen through the lens of national identity. So Visionary Switzerland in 1992, Austria in a Net of Roses in 1996, and Visionary Belgium in 2005, which became Szeemann's final exhibition. He died during the installation of that exhibition. So during the course of this long career, Szeemann was also developing the most extraordinary archive and library, and he really began to save everything that ever came to him. And he built an incredible library of books, rare books, research materials, and he, of course, carefully documented all of his projects and his interactions with artists. The Szeemann Archive came to the GRI in 2011. It's one of the largest collections that we've ever received. And since that time, we've been undertaking the quite challenging task of cataloging this archive and the library. And to give you a sense, the library is somewhere around 30,000 volumes. We're still cataloging it. Rare books, monographs, artist books, materials primarily from the 19th century up through his life. The archive is massive in scale with files on more than 22,000 artists, 56,000 photographs, huge amounts of materials on all of his projects and all of his research interests. And we're now in the, I think, final year of the cataloging process. And although cataloging is still ongoing, we've reached a sort of critical mass, I think, with these research materials, and we've begun to start working with this archive in a host of ways. We have an exhibition called The Kingdom of Obsessions, which will open at the Getty in 2018. We're working on collected volumes of his writings. I've been teaching a graduate seminar this quarter at UCLA with Professor Mi-Wan Kwan, and we're beginning to develop a digital curriculum that will allow this archive to be used as a teaching tool internationally. And we're also welcoming scholars from all over the world who are conducting research in the archive. And among those scholars has been our moderator this evening. Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev was in residence for the GRI at 3 months this year, from January to March. And this panel really developed out of Carolyn's time here working in the archive. And I'm, of course, so grateful to her for agreeing to take on this project at a time when she's been so busy. Before I give Carolyn a formal introduction, I'd just like to say a word of thanks to the team at the Getty here who've worked very hard to put this event together, which has included flying our panelists in from cities all over the world, helping them arrange some research time in the archive. That team includes Chelsea Larkin, Jennifer Park, Audrey Young, Pietro Rigolo, Michelle Fahmy, Ashley Newton, Alicia Houtrau, Danielle Summer, and Amy Hood, as well as our audiovisual and logistics and visitor services teams. And of course, I'd also like to remind everyone to please silence all of your devices this evening. Even if you think you've silenced them already, let's check again, just to be sure. And one thing, when you write in an introduction that you're going to introduce the person at the end, you have to remember to actually then add that to your introduction. So excuse me while I pull my phone out to read Carolyn's bio. Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev currently serves as curator of the exhibition Saltwater, A Theory of Thought Forms, the 14th Istanbul Biennial, which will run from September 5th to October 31st, 2015. And she's the Edith Krieger-Wolf Distinguished Visiting Professor in Art Theory and Practice at Northwestern University. She's also the newly nominated director of Castello di Rivoli Museum of Contemporary Art and GAM Torino, starting her tenure in January of 2016. Previously, she was visiting professor at the University of Leeds in 2014, the Menschel Visiting Professor in Art at the Cooper Union, the Pernod Ricard Visiting Professor at the Goethe Institute in Frankfurt. She was artistic director of dOCUMENTA 13 from 2009 to 12. You know, there are really only about, I don't know, maybe a dozen people in the world who understand the enormity of what directing an exhibition like dOCUMENTA means, and it's, I think, very important that Carolyn is one of them and can think about Szeemann's dOCUMENTA with a very special perspective. Carolyn's dOCUMENTA took place in Kassel, Germany, as well as in Kabul, Afghanistan, with additional projects in Alexandria, Cairo, Egypt, and Banff, Canada. This was all in 2012. Previously, she was artistic director of the 16th Biennale of Sydney and chief curator at Castello di Rivoli Museum from 2002 to 8, and interim director in 2009. She was senior curator at PS1 New York, and her books include, you see the family that we're building here. Her books include William Kentridge in 1998, Arte Povera in 1999, and for dOCUMENTA 13, the 100 Notes, 100 Thoughts series, as well as the logbook and the Book of Books. And so please join me in welcoming Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev.
Thank you very much for that introduction and for presenting such a beautiful array of images concerning Harald Szeemann's work. And I'd like to thank all the participants here this evening who have agreed to join to discuss from different perspectives Szeemann. So from that end to here, Alana Heiss, Mario Garcia Torres, Lea Porsager, Pietro Rigolo from the Getty Research Institute, as was just mentioned, and Giuseppe Penone, who participated in the dOCUMENTA 5 in 1972. So it is more an artist-driven evening than a typical curatorial conference discussion where amongst ourselves we discuss curatorial practice in the absence of artists. So what we will do is a series of interventions, each person in a certain order, and then there'll be hopefully time for a Q&A. I'd like to say a few words prior. Art historically, we in the early 21st century are most probably going to be remembered, for better and for worse, as an age when curatorial practice became a language on its own right, to be discussed alongside and in relation to the work of artists. This is partly because at a certain point of the mid to late 20th century, a number of people decided, for political reasons as well, to refuse the position of the curator as an art historian or an art critic who selected artworks in order to become instead an engaged fellow pilgrim in ways that are not always visible to the broad audiences of exhibitions. On that invisible side, I can say that an exhibition is always the act of locating artworks and bodies, producing an understanding of the role of partiality, of the importance of engaging with the site and, at the same time, producing a polylogue with other places. A place is no fixed thing. It has an episodic history and takes its particular aspect through an intense immersion. The Szeemann archive is now here, that of a great curator and a vibrant, curious, hard-working man who exhibited, amongst the first of his generation, the post-minimalist arte povera land art and conceptual artists of the late 60s and 70s in international exhibitions. At that time, internationalism went against entrenched nationalisms and regionalisms. It meant being part of an intellectually engaged anti-bourgeois counterculture form of radicality that saw no borders. There had been exhibitions of these artists locally, but Szeemann and a handful of others, both gallerists and independent organizers who would later, in retrospect, be called curators, felt the urgency to create these international exhibitions, to share a process together with artists such as Joseph Beuys, Mario Merz, Richard Long, Eva Hesse, Lawrence Wiener, Bruce Nauman, Giuseppe Penone, here with us today, and many others. This process, which owed something to an early avant-garde Dada and Surrealist events, as well as to Fluxus festivals, to which Szeemann had turned his attention just prior to the years we were discussing, would transform the traditional art exhibition from what it had mainly been, that is, a presentation of existing artworks according to a theme, into a site of experimentation, of embodied philosophical inquiry into knowledge and knowledge formation, according to a phenomenological approach that indirectly owes much to Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Herbert Marcuse, Wilhelm Reich, amongst others. It was highly political insofar as it went against any notion of an a priori authority, form of knowledge and established power, along lines that for Szeemann and others were anarchist more than Marxist. At the time, prior to so-called globalization, the internet, and easy and inexpensive air travel, this international aesthetic and revolutionary dialogue meant mainly working with artists from Western Europe and North America, as has just been said. Not out of an intent of exclusion, but as a consequence of those aforementioned characteristics of the age. Today, we live in a different world, riddled with proximity and distance, riddled with great inequalities, the frequent destruction of material and immaterial heritage, as we so sadly see over and over since the Bamiyan Buddha destructions, as well as an opposite obsession with digitizing material and immaterial heritage. Now, Szeemann, as a little bit of bio, was born in 1933 in Bern, Switzerland. He became the director of the Kunsthalle of Bern in 1961 at only 28 years old, a position that he did leave, as Glenn mentioned, in 1969 when the city officials opposed his When Attitudes Become Form exhibition. I should use this. Okay. So there we have 3 periods of Szeemann and the catalog of the exhibition. So after leaving that, he founded something he called the Agentur für geistige Gastarbeit, the Agency for Spiritual Temporary Migrant Work. Today, we would call it the precarious life of the independent curator. Shortly thereafter, on January 30th, 1970, he was nominated Secretary General of the dOCUMENTA 5, meaning its artistic director, a post he assumed on April 1st, 1970. The exhibition was finally held from June 30th to the 8th of October in 1972. And this is the same building of 1955 when Arnold Bode opened the first Documenta as the building in the state of Harald Szeemann's exhibition, with Ben, of course, on the top. Of course, that it says from page 15 to 16, so I'm going to go to page 15 to 16 because I think I cut out something. Well, I was going to describe to you what Documenta was, and I'm sure most of you already know. But having directed the Documenta 13, I'd like to remind you that Documenta is one of the best things the 20th century ever created in the field of culture, in my view. A century fraught by horrendous acts, such as 2 world wars, the camps and the atomic bomb, as well as the environmental catastrophe due to carbon fossil fuels and their abuse. It is a quinquennial exhibition, so it is not a biennale, it's every 5 years. And it began in the mind of Bode around 1948, so just at the close of the Nazi-fascist period, within the space where collapse and recovery are articulated. It emerged at the juncture of where art is felt to be of the utmost importance as an international common language and world of shared ideals and hopes, which implies that art has a major role to play in social processes of reconstruction, healing, and recovery, as well as the most useless of all activities within the legacy of the notion of the modernist autonomy of art in the 1950s. At the juncture of these 2 spheres came the Documenta that we know, and it developed into something, to answer Glenn, that seems to be very important, both to the curators who are entrusted with it as artistic directors, but also and mainly to the artists. It's very much an artist's exhibition, and when one exhibits or participates in Documenta, one enters into dialogue with all the previous works, the Walter de Maria Earth Kilometer and so forth, as did indeed, in particular, in this case, Mario Garcia Torres, who will speak about his engagement in that ideal, timeless dialogue between artists of different generations. Just after the Documenta, the largest, and that's Beuys, one small leftover of what was a great project, broader than the Beuys Office for Direct Democracy, which was an education project that Bazon Brock had devised for the Documenta 5. But just after the Documenta 5, he dedicated an exhibition, I think some of the speakers here will mention it, in 1974, to his grandfather, of all people, called Großvater, ein Pionier wie wir, a pioneer as we are, who had established a hairdressing shop in Bern in 1904, approximately in parallel, therefore, with the same generation of dropouts and artists and revolutionaries and radicals that had gone to Monte Verita, not so far away in Switzerland. And this is another image of the atmosphere at the opening, in the opening days of the Documenta 5, and this is actually on the closing day of Documenta. It's been widely discussed by Claire Bishop in an article somewhat critical of the heroic aspects of some of the curators of the period. But I know that the reason he was sitting there with glassy eyes looking up into the distance is because he was on LSD that night, which is not mentioned in that analysis, close reading of the photograph. Other moments, Nancy Graves, Conchi, who was also in your other image. And amongst the participants, Giuseppe Penone, with Svolgere la pelle, to unravel one's own skin of the body placed onto the windows of the Fridericianum, which we'll discuss shortly. It was indeed attacked in ways very different from the 69 When Attitudes Become Form, which was attacked mainly by civil society authorities, the city of Bern, while the case of Documenta in 72 is a bit like the falling of a dream in a way, because there were great tensions and conflicts with a number of artists, including those. This is the famous advertisement that was published. It's unfortunately blurry, but it was criticized by a number of artists, including Robert Smithson. And this is the article of Smithson that had come out in attacking the exhibition. Also, Daniel Buren was very critical. Not all artists, but it was a heated debate at the time. And as was said, after this period, there was a period of retreat, which I was very interested in, because I felt that in the dOCUMENTA 13, I had overlapped the spectacle of the dOCUMENTA with the retreat from the dOCUMENTA through the creation of a section of the exhibition and a series of seminars and workshops in Afghanistan, both in Bamiyan, specifically because of the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas, and in Kabul. So I came to the Getty, indeed, thinking of how to investigate the aftermath of dOCUMENTA 13 through the aftermath of dOCUMENTA 5, and a different way of looking at it. Now today, this early view of the curator as companion, committed with the artists to an aesthetics of authenticity, is quite blurred. As more and more curatorial schools open and have opened since the mid-1980s, we often call curator any institutional figure who organizes an exhibition with a theme, again. At times, disengaging him or herself from the experience and process of art making, which is exactly what Szeemann and that generation of practitioners rejected. It is even more often today not a journey with the artist, but a journey about the artist's journeys. Throughout his life, Szeemann was able to hold together this notion of open and free internationality with another opposite celebration of the extremely localized subject, the self-taught artist, the small artist collective, his grandfather, the Monte Verita community. This capacity or capability of holding and inventing a self-sufficient universe, also within a singular self, he called an individual mythology. Perhaps he was speaking about himself. To create it, he became that collector of notes, documents, letters, books, and other paraphernalia, which became his always growing archive studio office called Fabrica in an old factory nearby Tenia, in that small rural community where he lived with his second wife, Ingeborg Luscher. And such an archive is extremely fascinating to young people today who have grown up with very little material culture, precariously living a nomadic life with their laptops, backing up more and more into an invisible so-called clouds. People who study archival documents, such as students and researchers here at the Getty, have access to much privileged information. But the counterside of this is very interesting, and it is that all the work of Szeemann tends to become put on the same level when I have conversations with people, especially students, while there was a landscape of peaks and valleys of major and minor projects. An archivist may reference small exhibitions and almost private journeys and projects, like the Grandfather Show and the Monte Verita exhibitions, in the same breath, or as if they were on the same scale as when Attitudes Become Forms in 1969, the dOCUMENTA 5, or the famous Macchine Celibi, celebratory machines exhibition, or the Total Art Gesamtkunstwerk exhibition. While in the experience and memory of visitors and artists, these are incomparably different in scale and impact. Or they may speak about the realisms exhibition that Jean-Christophe Amann was entrusted with at the Neue Galerie in the dOCUMENTA of 1972, as if this building and this section of the exhibition were very, very important. At the time, in the experience of most participants and viewers in the art world, that location was, however, not of primary importance, and the game was being actually played out at the Fridericianum. There is thus an oral history to be recorded, and that needs to be measured alongside the validity of the documents here at the Getty, without which we flatten history or even begin to privilege the more documented or written aspects of it. The smaller projects need to be in relation, in attention and relation to the energy of the bigger events that Szeemann organized. So how can one think with this archive here? The Getty is in the process of testing and imagining how to do that. And this will be ever more important in the future when we have collected more and more of such archives. And this is why tonight's event was mainly based on, let's call it, the personal history of a participant in the dOCUMENTA, as well as the personal relations and memories of Alana Heiss, who was a close friend of Szeemann and saw many of his projects, as well as the imaginations and projections onto this past of younger artists such as Mario and Lea. So to go in 2 seconds through what I did here, I looked at the papers concerning Monte Verita, which is there. Castle is there. This is the community as it was in the early 20th century, with these small bungalows that were built by theosophists and nudists and so on. Theosophical architecture gate, similar to some of the things you find in the neighborhood below Hollywood here, to be where Annie Besant and other theosophists came. Image of radical, non-progress-oriented, and yet visionaries of the time. Laban was teaching dance. Szeemann's notes, he kept writing over and over again, why were they there? What could have happened? What is left? What is left? What is left? And a small note referring to Ingeborg, sheer prophecy, pure dreams, and number 5, AS. So I started saying, well, what is AS and who is AS? And AS, these are just plans of the Monte Verita and the exhibition of the Monte Verita. AS is Armand Schultes, who has a wall text about him. And Armand Schultes is the missing link, I found. Armand Schultes dropped out of society in his office job in 1951, went to live in this house a few kilometers away from Fabrica, less than maybe 10-minute drive from Szeemann's archive, and created a cosmology, an individual mythology of all the knowledges of the world possible, physics, philosophy, science, all sorts of things, that he wrote on pieces of metal and wood and placed in the trees, creating a gigantic archive. In the dOCUMENTA catalog, there is a page referring to AS. Was AS mad or not? The photograph is there. It is not part of the Kranken, the Geistkranken, the Daniel Sperry section of the Neue Galerie with the work of the outsider artists and the mentally handicapped. It was refused by Daniel Sperry to be included in that, and it was proposed by none other than Ingeborg Lüscher, who brought photographs of Armand Schultes's Encyclopedia in the Woods to Szeemann, who invited her to present them in the dOCUMENTA 5. And because Daniel Sperry didn't want it in his section, they were placed in a vitrine in between the 2 floors of the Neue Galerie. None of this is in any physical document. It's all oral history or storytelling, and you may believe me or not. But what is in the archive is that he did go in August 72, so in the middle of the dOCUMENTA, to visit her. He went to Switzerland. This is his diary, twice, Tegna, on the 21st of August, a few miles away from, and then he went again in September from the Schultes house, which ended up being an enormous, beautiful book that Ingeborg Lüscher published in the autumn of 1972. In that same year, Schultes dies, and his heirs destroy the property to sell it. The whole archive was lost, except for a few fragments, one of which is in the Getty Archives because, knowing my obsession with Armand Schultes as the alter ego of Harald Szeemann and the real Harald Szeemann, according to him, or his subconscious, in a wild psychoanalytic reading that I make of this, because no matter how good the archive was, it could never be the Schultes archive that brought together culture and nature in this beautiful woods where the verbal language is the same as the trees growing. So our words and our thoughts and our ideas, our mental knowledges are on the same level as our knowledges of all other processes of energy transformation in the physical world. So Pietro Rigolo came and showed me an object of Armand Schultes in the Getty archive. So that's what I did. Now, in my 3 months here was investigating this missing link between the Monte Verita exhibition and the Documenta. So I would like now to, without transition, introduce our first guest, which is Giuseppe Penone. And what you see here is the artwork that was installed 1 year prior to the opening of the Documenta 13 in the summer, on the day of the summer solstice of 2011. Vero? 11 l'abbiamo allestito? Yes, well, I'm sure it was. Anyway, Giuseppe Penone. So I would like to thank him again and thank the Getty and all of the staff here for organizing the hospitality and this panel and taking care of all of the panelists so well. So Penone was born in in a small town near Woods, not so different from those that we just saw in those pictures. Garcia, Italy, in 1947. He currently still lives and works in Torino and Paris as well. Long related to developments in sculpture in the 1960s and 70s and to the arte povera, his work retains its own distinctive character. Penone's work embodies a physical, tactile awareness specific to all things, life happening through the eye and the fingertips, the tree as a fluid material, and breathing as an automatic, involuntary sculpture of air in and out of the lungs. His recent solo exhibitions have been all over the place, so I can't even begin to say, but from Beirut to Grenoble, from Versailles, the Gardens of Versailles in 2013, to Winterthur, Madison Square Park in 2013, the Whitechapel, London in 2013. We won't go any further back than 2013 because it's a bit long, but he did receive the Premium Imperiale International Art Award for Sculpture in 2014 and participated in many documentas, Documenta 5, 72, Documenta 7, and 82 with Rudi Fuchs, and Documenta 13, of course, with me. His art incarnates the interaction between human beings and the world. Nature and culture are mutually embedded and defined in his universe, which is both ecologically and anthropologically grounded. Since the late 60s, he has explored notions of empirical experience, focusing on human gestures, such as touching, shaping, or molding. In many of his works, therefore, it is the arts of imprinting, carving, and casting that form the basis of the technique and the deeper meanings. And his art is grounded on a respect and love for natural processes. In '69, in the hills south of Torino, he began to carve industrial wooden beams, with stubs shooting out in various directions where branches once were, by carving around the tree to arrive at an earlier, younger age of the tree, around the knots. These works seem at first glance like figurative sculptures. At a closer look, they reveal themselves to be the fruit of a very particular kind of labor, stripping away layers of softer wood, following growth rings until he reaches the shape of the younger tree, at an earlier moment in the life, prior to being cut and prior to being shaped into the standard geometry of the beam. Just as he explores and reveals the secret stories of a tree's growth by carving layers of wood away from a log to retrieve that earlier stage in the development of the tree, So Penone explores and mapped his own body. The body, like a tree, has a history of slow growth and change, marked, for instance, by the concentric circles of fingerprints on skin. Patate, well, we're going to skip patate because we need Penone to speak. So I think that that's enough to introduce this wonderful artist. And Giuseppe, would you like to say a few words, and shall I join you there, or would you like to come here? Giuseppe, we are here gathered together to learn from you about the experience of Documenta 5. If you'd like to start with that, your participation in the exhibition, but not only your own, also your experience of the exhibition in terms of the other artists and the other works.
Documenta 5.
Puoi parlare in italiano?
No, sì, parlo in italiano. Documenta 5 è stata un'esperienza unica perché io ero molto giovane, avevo 24 anni.
It was a very unique experience
25 anni.
He was only 25 years old.
Ed era un momento di grande fermento e di grande creatività nel mondo occidentale e in quei paesi che avevano uno sviluppo analogo.
It was an incredibly intense period in terms of creativity and development of the arts in the Western world, which is the world he knew.
Era una mostra che continuava in parte l'esperienza di Szeemann con When Attitude Became Form di Berna, Amsterdam e successivamente a Londra, dove io avevo avuto la fortuna di partecipare non come artista invitato, ma ho partecipato assieme agli amici artisti di quegli anni, italiani, all'installazione delle opere a Londra.
It came after a period of development that he remembers, starting with When Attitudes Become Form, which was in Switzerland, Germany, and London. And he had the fortune of seeing that as well develop, not as a participating artist, because his first show was in 1969, so Szeemann, of course, didn't know the work at that time. But I added that. But as a friend of the Italian artists who were participating, and therefore he was present during their preparations, installation, and opening events.
Comunque anche a Documenta 5 lo spirito con gli altri artisti, c'era un ottimo scambio di idee, un ottimo rapporto, non c'era un rapporto conflittuale, ma era piuttosto il partecipare ad un intento comune, quindi c'era un'idea di un'affinità di pensiero e un lavoro comune che si svolgeva.
At that time, in 1969, there was a very good spirit between the artists. They felt that they were participating together with a very strong common cause. It wasn't it was a sense of one project.
E Documenta 5 è stato un momento di svolta sotto questo punto di vista, perché c'era ancora una parte di quello spirito che dimostra del 69, ma si introduceva un altro aspetto che era la spettacolarizzazione delle idee. Questo forse anche per una necessità di avvicinare oppure di interagire con la società in un modo più forte, più evidente.
He sees, by the time Documenta 5 opens, a big difference compared to 69. There was a change, and there was still some of that spirit left, but mainly there was a shift probably caused by the need to create more of a spectacle and to, he says, spectacularize those ideas that were shared ideas. And he says probably motivated by a social wish to render more communicated to a broader audience those earlier ideas.
C'è un'altra caratteristica importante della Documenta 5, è la posizione geografica di Kassel, la piccola città dove c'era la Documenta, che è sul confine tra la Germania occidentale con la Germania orientale.
Another characteristic or reason perhaps for the difference of attitude was because Kassel was a very small town very near the border in Western Germany, but very near the border with Eastern Germany.
E questo creava una particolare attenzione alla mostra e anche una particolare tensione. Ed questo è una cosa che...
Traduco prima?
No, sì.
This creates, on the one hand, a very particular kind of attention to the exhibition because of its geopolitical location, but at the same time also a very particular tension.
Questa situazione è poi mutata nelle Documenta successive ed è un qualcosa che si è ritrovato nella Documenta curata da Carolyn.
Cosa è la tensione?
Una tensione di un tipo diverso, perché ha creato un'attenzione alla situazione dell'Afghanistan di quegli anni. Quindi un rapporto ancora una volta di attenzione ad una tensione internazionale.
It's interesting. He is analyzing the relationship between the Documenta 5 on the border with Eastern Germany and the Documenta 13, which I created in relation to Afghanistan in the post-Taliban period. So he says that Documenta 13 had also a similar tension. Indeed, Penone was one of the artists who participated in the Afghanistan exhibitions. I want to go to those just a minute. Vado a quelle foto così si vede, no? This is a particular day. This is how ecologically minded German cities cut the grass. They bring the sheep. It's a very good idea. Voilà, this is the piece that was the mirror, the pendant to the tree in Kassel that most people have seen, is the marble carved along the veins of the marble, somehow propping up a tree in the Baghe Babur Gardens in Kabul. And you see them together. This brackets the Documenta 13. So for my exhibition, actually, Penone's work was extremely important through this bracketing, in the sense that other artists were in both locations, but Penone was the first one installed in Kassel and the last one to leave in Kabul, because he donated the sculpture to the city of Kabul. And of course, this one on the right refers to the earlier work about the tree will grow except for in that place. So with time, the tree will grow and embrace the stone, or certainly will change and will interact in an intelligent way with the stone over the years. So it's a piece for the future.
Sì, esatto.
Ma qualcosa su questo conflitto degli artisti tipo Smithson e Buren contro, cioè cosa hai sentito quando eri lì? I am asking him what was happening with the artists who were very angry. Just to go into a little bit of lighter conversations.
Ma ora io non ricordo esattamente queste polemiche. La sensazione che avevo avuto io era di una, come dicevo prima, di una spettacolarizzazione dell'arte, quindi di un uso di alcune forme espressive che non avevano, che avevano una motivazione che non era profondamente legata all'opera, ma a delle necessità diverse.
E quindi una sorta di quasi di decadenza rispetto al 69-70?
Non so se dire decadenza, probabilmente nello spirito di Szeemann era un'idea di progresso, era molto positiva la visione.
So he repeats that what he felt was much stronger spectacularity in the documenta than in the When Attitudes Become Form. And I said, do you see that as a kind of inversion of tendency or decadence? He said, no, probably Szeemann saw it as some form of moving forward. E il rapporto fra la Neue Galerie con queste mostre sul realismo e il Fridericianum, dove molti degli artisti di When Attitudes Become Form erano, com'è questa? Do you ask him about the relationship between the Fridericianum exhibition and the Neue Galerie, where all those other realist exhibitions were?
Ma nelle Neue Galerie c'erano delle opere e c'era una mostra con una, diciamo, allestita in un modo più tradizionale.
He says that the Neue Galerie was an exhibition that was more traditional. It was installed in a traditional way.
Mentre il Fridericianum, anche per le caratteristiche del luogo, perché era un castello con degli spazi straordinari, molto epici, direi.
Also because of the epic nature of the architecture of the Fridericianum at the time. That's before it got renovated.
Permetteva un'enfasi e anche, come ho detto prima, una spettacolarizzazione o la realizzazione di progetti di grande respiro.
The architecture itself maybe offered large, breathtaking works. Last question, prima di passare agli altri. Ci racconti un pochino del lavoro qui? Che sembra molto misterioso. Che cosa hai esposto qui e anche, mi pare, nel catalogo almeno c'era rovesciare i prodotti, e il terzo lavoro era la fotografia.
Sì, certo.
So I'm going to ask him to kindly describe for us the works that he exhibited in the documenta.
Devo dire che la mia partecipazione, e come la partecipazione degli altri artisti italiani in quella mostra, era nata in un modo un po' particolare, nel senso che nel progetto primo di Szeemann c'era quella di mostrare una collezione di un artista italiano, che si chiama Pistoletto, che aveva collezionato delle opere degli altri artisti.
He says, first of all, the invitation or the participation in Documenta went through a very particular story and avenue. The first intention of Szeemann was to install and borrow the collection of artworks that Michelangelo Pistoletto, fellow Arte Povera artist, had collected of his colleagues. So it was to be the taking of a collection to Kassel.
A questo progetto gli artisti hanno rifiutato di aderire.
So they refused to do it, to participate.
E quindi sono stati invitati individualmente.
And so Szeemann changed and invited them individually.
Ma questo è stato è stato per alcuni, per esempio per me, è stato non una cosa così positiva, perché c'era poi stato poco tempo per preparare l'opera in modo conveniente.
This was not good for me, in particular because it gave me very little time to make a work, to make a new work.
In ogni caso, tornando all'opera, io quegli anni stavo lavorando, avevo fatto un lavoro che era rovesciare i propri occhi, che era l'immagine che avevo dato per il catalogo.
In these years he had done the reversing one's eyes, which is the image that he gave for the catalog, which is the mirror contact lenses, so that the artist is blind, but the viewer sees the visual field that the artist would see had the artist not blinded himself.
Era un lavoro sui limiti fisici del corpo.
It's a work about the physical limitations of the body.
E in Documenta la mia intenzione era quella di ho realizzato l'impronta di tutta la pelle del mio corpo.
So in Documenta he developed that idea by making a print of his whole body skin.
che ho messo alla finestra, che è lo spazio di divisione tra l'interno dell'architettura e lo spazio esterno dell'architettura.
And positioned it on the glass, which is the space of limit between the so-called interior and exterior of architecture. E questo l'ultimo? And this piece was in the same room.
E questo era nella stessa stanza e c'era...
Ma domanda, il ritratto rovesciare i propri occhi è stato esposto o no?
Mi pare di sì, però non era quell'immagine.
This is interesting because most archivists and historians say the reversing one's gaze photograph was only in the catalogue and not in the exhibition. But he remembers that it was, but not the original
I am not
first
sure.
image. But
non sono così sicuro.
he's not sure. But anyway, now he's not sure. But anyway, he said he did. Anyway, and this...
Ma questo era un po' come l'idea di rovesciare gli occhi, dove c'è un'impronta, c'è una fotografia di una mano dove le dita sono pressate contro un vetro.
Okay, this work consists in taking a photograph of the image behind glass of a finger pressing against the glass.
E la fotografia in bianco e nero, nel punto di pressione della pelle, la pelle diventa bianca.
In the place where the skin is pushing against the glass, the skin is white, is clear. It comes out nothing, clear. And so then...
E si appiattisce anche.
And it's flat.
Quindi c'è una coincidenza tra lo sguardo, tra l'immagine e il contatto.
So there is a coincidence between the image that one sees, which is flat, and the point of contact with the skin, which is also flat in that area of the white hole where the... Yes, and...
E avevo posto un vetro, uno specchio, per sottolineare questa...
Yes.
Questo.
And the photograph, which has the pellicola, how do you say, the film, is glued onto mirror, so that in the place where the contact is, it is the only place you see mirror, which comes out like light in the room. Bene.
Vabbè.
Vogliamo aggiungere qualcosa su cosa pensi di Szeemann? Un'ultima? I asked, what do you think of Szeemann? Last question.
No, io penso che sia stato un uomo eccezionale che ha incarnato soprattutto nelle prime mostre che ha fatto e anche con la documenta, ha incarnato veramente lo spirito del tempo.
He's a person who really embodied the spirit of the time very well in his first exhibitions.
Poi successivamente lui ha elaborato un pensiero e ha sviluppato una riflessione che non era più in rapporto pressante con
il tempo?
Col contemporaneo sotto un certo punto di vista. Forse nell'ultima mostra, quella della Biennale, di nuovo ha tentato questa esperienza, però in un modo molto diverso.
Penone's opinion is that after that period he goes into working in ways that are less in touch with the contemporary.
Sì, più o meno.
Except for the end. Okay, thank you. I would like to now introduce Alana Heiss, director of Clock Tower Productions and the leader in the US, in my view, of the groundbreaking early 1970s alternative space movement, which radically changed the way large-scale art projects were produced, shown, and seen. She started her own institutions, like Harald Szeemann. They were semi-institutional and semi-independent, like Harald Szeemann. She began to work outside the spaces traditionally dedicated to art, such as the Museum of Modern Art or the Guggenheim, and in close connection with a number of artists. In 1971, she filed for a 4-day permit to conduct a film shoot under the Brooklyn Bridge. Instead, she organized an exhibition of contemporary art and performances there, which took place on May 24th. The Brooklyn Bridge event was the first exhibition of sculpture in derelict urban spaces in the US, maybe worldwide. She included more than 20 artists such as André, Bollinger, Jean Heistein, her partner at the time, Sol LeWitt, Richard Nonas, Dennis Oppenheim, Gordon Matta Clark, Dorothea Rockburn, and more. Shortly afterward, in 1972-73, she founded, this is still under the Brooklyn Bridge, as you see, derelict space. Now, she founded in 1972-73 the nonprofit Institute for Art and Urban Resources to cover the various activities, in a way, with something institutional and bureaucratic in tone. It was dedicated to utilizing abandoned buildings all over New York for exhibitions, performances, and studios. The Institute for Art and Urban Resources was also umbrella to the many, many spaces, such as the Clock Tower Gallery that she had founded in '72. And other locations were the Idea Warehouse later that year, 10 Bleecker Street, Coney Island Sculpture Factory, and more. Around 1975, she was thinking about an anti-museum. Something long-term, with no collection and only with living artists. In the first exhibition in what came to be known as PS1 Contemporary Art Center, the exhibition rooms opened in 1976. During the 35 next years, in collaboration with many curators drawn to PS1, she organized more than 2,000 exhibitions. And in the year 2000, because I believe in numerology, PS1 merged with the Museum of Modern Art. And 8 years later, in 2008, she left to return to Clock Tower Gallery and to run its online radio programs operating at www.artonair.org. She's also received the Légion d'honneur and so forth from France and many, many prizes for her activities. So I would like to introduce Alana Heiss, who was a friend of Harald Szeemann.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. I really have to get these slides from you. I'm just dumbstruck to see images that I haven't seen before in years. And actually, after looking through the Szeemann archives in the last couple of days, I've been so thrilled. So very thrilled to see things that I hadn't been able to. You like this one? That's so crazy. Don't show that one. Actually, we don't want to show this one yet. I've got to get myself organized up here. So overcome with the pictures that I can't. Let's go back to nothing. Yes, my name is Alana. Carolyn is my friend, and that's why I'm here. But thanks also very much to you for inviting me, Stefan, and of course to Andrew, who is lurking, or maybe he left in despair. Anyway, let's settle some things. A number of you have noticed this and commented on it. I probably have about 30 or 40 comments on it this evening, so let's clear this up. This is called the Tomato Purse. It's a fantastic purse. I knew that it would attract everybody in LA. I wanted to take it to a fancy dinner party last night, and I did. It was designed by an Italian whose name is Carla blah, 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 blah. She won the great Italian Purse Prize in '67. It's in very limited production. I didn't know any of this, but if you look it up on your computer or iPad and just look up tomato purse, a bunch of things will come up and you will see this. You will see the picture of this, but you will never see this purse because, if obtainable, it would cost 2,750 euros. However, it did not cost me 2,750 euros because of my keen curatorial eye. I was walking down the street in Rome a couple years ago, looked in a cheap shoe store, and This caught my eye. I knew I had to have it. I walked in. It was 50 euros. That seemed too much. I haggled it down to 45, and I also bought from the same designer that I know at the time something called the owl purse, which is not with me. But if you look me up in New York, you can see the owl purse. I took it to another fancy dinner in Rome the following night, and every woman in the room wanted the tomato purse. So I went back to the cheap shoe store the next day. I was hard to find. I don't speak Italian. I'm running around. I see it. I go in and I say, it's me. I want all the tomato purses you have. And they looked at me and they said, we'll go in the back and we'll look. And then a man came out after 10 minutes and he said, I'm so sorry, you're going to have to leave. The store is closing. That's because I found out later with a lot of keen archival research that it was stolen. It was stolen purse from the Florentine archives of Carlo, blah, 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 blah. So the question really is before us. Knowing that it had been stolen, did I report it? Or take it out of Italy in my suitcase? Carolyn has warned me that we have to talk about Szeemann. And I was... instead of fashion. Of course we're going to talk about Szeemann. I was not obsessed with Szeemann, but I was in great awe of him. He's 10 years older than me, and he had the wisdom and the power that a European male who had the advantages of working with those artists during those years had. I also had some great advantages because of the Vietnam War. I'd been in England and was able to travel many times to Germany and Italy and saw many of the early shows, particularly in the German museums, but also in some of the great galleries in Italy. Anyway, that gave me a context that made it rather simple for me to relate when I became a more formed person to the contextual issues that would concern me in doing exhibitions. All I ever really wanted to do when I grew up was to make exhibitions. I didn't care whether the museums weren't then and aren't now, and very interesting to me. I went to a conservatory of music where I was going to be like a violin player. I was a violin player, a piano player, and all that, but I wasn't really very good. All my relatives were very good, and they all went and played in orchestras and so on, but I said to my teacher, what's the future here? I don't seem to be as good as everybody else. And he said, you're really not. So anyway, I said, what would I end up being? He said, second chair, second violin section in a third-rate city. So I went into contemporary art. And I wanted to be with the very best people of my generation, and I wanted to work with them. I knew that I wasn't an artist, but I was someone who could work with artists and enjoy it and love it. And for reasons like that, they drew me to people, particularly to Szeemann, but to other people of that caliber, who had visions and wanted to do things, and I wanted to see how they did it. Mainly, I wanted to find out how Szeemann put together shows. So I talked to him a lot. I went over to Europe. I followed him around. And one time, I followed one of his shows, the Bruce Nauman show, which started in Madrid at the Reina Sofia, and really watched it and visited it when it would come to another place to try to see what decisions he'd made in changing the show as it traveled. To people who are involved with installation, as Szeemann was and as I am, these small decisions become terribly important, and you can sort of like pick up tips or something. Does anyone have any water? I'd love. No. Do you have any liquor? So, moving right along, I was going to give a very studied speech on the differences in those Bruce Nauman shows, and Pietro worked hard with me to go and find all the floor plans that had been adjusted throughout the show's travels, and we looked at them carefully. And thank you very much for all that effort you put into it. But I realized it would be really boring for all of you to hear me talk about how Szeemann changed these shows. And I know that it would have been boring because once I gave a 3-hour lecture in one of my other obsessions, which is wall labels. And even though I gave this lecture in a German institution, people walked out, because to me, the wall labels, and whether they're beveled or not, and whether they're on a card, and that's really a lot. And Szeemann also cared a lot about wall labels. He cared everything about it. So he told me, and I knew already, I didn't have to hear it from him, when you're going to work with art, which is less distinguishable, say, than a work on a canvas on a wall, you have to be really careful about the situation and where you place it. That means that if there's going to be a label, it has to be a very straightforward label. The label can't be messy like the art. The place, if it's messy, it has to be messy in a clean way, which is another thing that Bob Ryman told me early on at PS1. He said, this show needs a really clean floor. And so he spent a lot of time cleaning the floor in the room that he had in the Rooms exhibition. And after that, and I did a big Ryman show the next year, when he put beautiful, beautiful film over the windows, but he also said, never change the walls. Walls that children can learn in are good sizes for people to look at art. So, you get these architectural tips, the clean floor, and, I've pretty much followed, as much as I could, rules which pick up sort of like tips, and you change them when necessary, or artists tell you something else will work better. But I would check in with Szeemann pretty regularly, and it was always my dream to work with him. And now what I'm going to do is talking as quickly as I possibly can, because I know that Chelsea's down there with her sign saying, 15 minutes, 14 minutes, 13 minutes. You can't imagine what we're going through up here. So there are a couple things. I just ditched the entire Bruce Nauman project. I'll call him up later and say, we're sorry. And what I thought I would do is talk about 3 things that I do know something about. I thought it'd be more interesting for you to hear some personal anecdotes. And it's my hope that Glenn will allow me back in, and I'll be able to really go through those notes, because it was very touching for me to see Harald's writing and to look at it. And yesterday I had the odd tear or two, and it was particularly poignant for me when I realized that I was seeing some of my own notes to him. So that was odd and wonderful at the same time. In the fact that there's a 10-year difference, and he died, I think, when he was about 71. I just turned 72, so it's the right time to invite me, Glenn, now. We may, Now, the things I'd like to talk about is a sort of interesting phenomenon. People are starting to, maybe they always have, but I certainly didn't hear it, compare Szeemann to Walter Hopps. And I'd like to speak to that. I knew both of them very well, and I worked with both of them. And this seems to me a very brutally inconsistent and stupid comparison. And it's just because you wouldn't know Walter Hopps that you would compare him to Szeemann, or the vice versa. I think that everybody sort of like to think that America has a stake in the great, crazy curator sweepstakes in the world. Europe had Jan Hoot and Szeemann, and we had no one. So Walter Hopps is a nominee. He's a nominee, but they came from such different ideas and reasons. Walter Hopps' presence in California is very legendary with Irving Blum. He started the Ferris Gallery. He was an important person here and continued to be an important person. Walter Hopps was really always super involved with objects, with hanging objects, with collections, with very rich people, with the opposite of all that, going against it in some way, going against his own instincts, whatever they would. And Walter Hopps was a seriously disturbed person, functioning in a world which he could function in with a great deal of elegance and frequently very beautiful shows. But he was not an anarchist like Szeemann. He was a person whose behavioral problems caused him to behave in ways that, people might think were amusing or intentional. And these stories can be told at another lecture, and there are many of them, and they're legendary famous, and a lot of them involve California. And I was involved in at least one of them because for some reason I was sent to carry messages to some of these people because they would answer the door or whatever like that. So I was, when Walter Hopps, for instance, barred himself in the hotel in Washington, D.C., because he said he had to work on the catalog, but the show was opening, in the next 2 weeks, and he hadn't done the catalog, of course. Of course he hadn't done the catalog. Why would he do the catalog? And he stayed in the hotel for 2 weeks with people sneaking food into him, and, finally we got him out of the hotel and just said, it doesn't matter, you didn't do the catalog, it's okay, you can do it later. So he came out. Szeemann would never do anything like that. Szeemann was incredibly responsible, extraordinarily committed to the artists and the shows that he was working with. And as I am reminded by looking in the last 2 days, his organization was not only meticulous, but flexible and changeable and movable. And he had these systems for moving pieces around that, of course, we all have, but it looked to me from yesterday's investigation that they were even better than I thought. And when we would trade back and forth information, which we did from time to time, it was always really easy to understand. Walter was very nice to me, but one of the problems that Walter had in his series of misunderstandings about reality was he was a conspiracy addict. So there were always gigantic conspiracies going on that he had to be aware of, be afraid of, be worried about, and which, if he liked you as he did me, he could engage you in help, to keep out of that danger area of that conspiracy. And again, often this would involve which artist you talk to and when you talk to him, at what time of the day, whether you had a meeting at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Now, it is true that Szeemann was not always a normal person in terms of the times that he would make, to see artists, because that's like many of us, particularly me, who am almost completely nocturnal. So I see all my studio visits in the night because, that's when I'm up. And that's what a lot of our artists are up to. So it's always been not too bad for me, and maybe people tell those stories about me, but Walter was very inconvenient for people. And he did this show in Washington, D.C. Well, first of all, he worked in Pasadena for a couple of years, and of course he got fired. And then he got a job at the Cork and Gallery on the East Coast. He got 2 years there. Then he was fired, of course, because he didn't do any work and didn't turn up. This is the opposite of Szeemann, who worked day and night, turned up everywhere, and was constantly making brilliant proposals to museums which rejected them. Yeah. But one of Walter's proposals to me was a 36-hour show, which he later did in Washington. And it was a show where he took over, I can't remember, museum-ish space and then 2 other alternative spaces. And he said, when he did it at Washington, to me he said, we were going to open PS1 for 36 hours. During that time, everyone can bring anything they want to show and we'll put it up. Doesn't have to be an artist. It can be anyone. We'll put it up. 36 hours. Walter always called from payphones, so you could never call him back. This idea didn't attract me, but I tried to carry on with the plan. I said, well, do you mean it is open for 36 hours and that we spend how long installing it? That's the kind of mind I have, right? Are we going to have 36 hours for installation time and then we're open for 36 hours? Or is the installation going to go on during the 36 hours? And so he said, Alana, you're missing the point. So I said, I don't think that show is for PS1. We're already confused, and we can't even stay open 5 hours, So he took that show, and it was a real hit in Washington, as you can well imagine. And Szeemann talked to me about that show, and he said, what's this guy up to? I think he's really interesting, and somehow he's getting out of the community that he's working in. He's getting the artistic soul. Okay, so when Walter, the show that he planned for PS1 that I was quite interested in was called 1,000 Images. And Walter said, we're going to take PS1 and we're going to put 1,000 images in it, and it's going to be wonderful. And everyone's going to go through PS1. They're going to see more images than they've ever seen in their entire life. But you know, you couldn't really tell. You tell Walter, people have seen 1,000 images many, many, many times, and you're trying examples of it, you know, in the dictionary and you know various encyclopedias. No, Alana, you don't get the point. So we went on as far as we could. We even had the backing of the Demonils for that particular show because the Demonils loved Walter. He was everything they loved: tall, smart, interesting, and a fantastic show installer. And if you ever in Texas and you get a chance to see Walter's various installations for the Demonils in that great museum, you know, it's a very heady experience. He wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't anything to do with Harald Szeemann. He was selfish, he was irregular, he was bad. Is it over? Okay.
But would you like to add anything about Szeemann?
Well, I was going to tell you about Szeemann's last show with me.
Okay.
He finally came to me after all the years I wanted him to do a show, and he said, I have a show, a wonderful show. It was the real road trip, and let's just do some of these pictures. Whoops. There's the group shot of Szeemann and me, and as many of the artists that could be rounded up. There were 20 artists in the show. 17 were from Spain, and 3 were from other countries in Latin America that Szeemann just wanted in the show, so he changed the description of the show that it could include them. These are the other shows in the building at the same time, as you see. It was a very full building. Tim Noble and Sue Webster was a show I was doing on the top floor. Paul Graham, who you know is a great photographer, and so on. There were queens and kings in attendance. People by this time knew that Szeemann was a great man, and they would come over in deputations, and you know, he got limousines everywhere, which he didn't care and often missed. This is Szeemann's and my planning of the event. He's crossed off lots of things. I've added lots of things. This was the poster invitation that we worked on. Szeemann kept having different pictures taken because he didn't want the angle. This was the after party, which was very, very important part of any exhibition for Harald.
This was his last exhibition?
This is the last exhibition that he was able to plan and end. He died during the next one that he was making in Belgium. This was a bar that Harald found that had a gigantic aquarium, and that live girls were dressed as mermaids, and they were swimming in the aquarium. And he thought that was a good, one for the railroad trip, because people came over the ocean from Spain, like Columbus. This was one of Harald's most awful pieces that he insisted be in the show. It's a bronze dead dog, which meant that the ASPCA picketed PS1 for weeks and weeks and weeks. And these are just some of the floor plans, the other floor plans. We went back and forth, and this is how we did it. And our writing is almost the same. It's so strange to see.
Wonderful.
Carolyn knows these floor plans so well because she's worked with them in her past. And
okay, so thank you very much. So onwards, I would like to hold your attention for a little bit longer and invite Mario Garcia Torres to join us. Mario lives in Mexico City, and he studied in California art, and he is an artist, as many of you know, and some of his more important recent solo exhibitions have been at the Stedelijk in Amsterdam in 2007, at the Kunsthalle in Zurich in 2008, the Berkeley Art Museum in 2009, Reina Sofia in 2010, Madre in 2013, as well as projects in other places, including the Hammer here, and Perez Art Museum in Miami. And he did take part in dOCUMENTA 13, as well as in other international exhibitions, including the Biennale in Venice in 2007. What he does is still in the making, but what I can say about what he does is that he investigates the blind spots in recent art history and the immaterial legacy of some conceptual gestures. By reactivating lost threads associated with other artists, such as Robert Barry, which was the source of the Peace in Venice Biennale in 2007, Martin Kippenberger, Alighiero Boetti, that was in relation to the piece done for dOCUMENTA 13, or Buren, he opens up spaces of reflection about the nature of art and its relation to life and politics as well. History, in his world, does not travel by way of the proof found in written documents only. It travels through many paths, encounters, word of mouth, and it's characterized by ruptures, moments of slow time and others of sudden acceleration. Can we imagine that time overlaps, inverts, repeats, and even rehearses itself? I think Mario would say. I'm not going to introduce you any longer, because if we save a little time on the introductions, there's more time for you, so welcome.
Same as Alana, there is the things that I'm supposed to talk about, and then there's the things that I would like to talk about. So I'm just going to talk until I get a stop sign here from the first row. You know, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about how my experience has been for a couple of weeks here at the archive. And I'm going to say that, you know, when one approaches the Szeemann archive here, one immediately realizes that it's going to sound a little bit poetic, but that the fact that, you know, life is made of very many tiny different fragments. An archive, I felt, is a little bit like a movie, where one makes sense from scene to scene, you know. One makes interpretations from jump to jump. So that goes to the fact that we cannot get ever a truthful story. Maybe we don't get through an archive a correct story, but one of them, one possible story. I'm interested in those type of stories, as Carolyn was saying, those types of versions of our history. That's when so it's only coping with the fact that those stories are not told literally in an archive, that one can start to reconstruct somebody's life or somebody's practice and try to understand it, if possible, in some kind of diagonal way. You know, when one is there sitting in front of those boxes, one has to ask oneself, what made what provoked what are the actual facts? Or one has to ask himself, is it something written, or because it's written, because it's published? Is it a fact? Is that what he thought really? Can we make conclusions out of that? So, you know, the responses to some of those questions, there's really more gaps than answers, really. So my proposals here for this presentation is to look at little fragments, to be less literal about what we want to define, and just talk peripherically, if possible, about Szeemann, and see if that leads us anywhere. You know, I met Harald Szeemann in Mexico in the year 1999, maybe I'm thinking now 2000. I was working at a museum back then. He was invited there, and I was in charge basically of driving him around. And, you know, it was an amazing experience, but one thing that I cannot really forget is the fact that he probably didn't sleep much. Or I made that conclusion because I drop him off every night, very late at night. And then I pick him up again at the hotel very early in the morning. And by the time I pick him up, he had a chunk of papers, like at least 15, 16 written notes that he wanted to send to somebody. So, you know, the technology was pretty bad at the time, very slow. So throughout that week, I spent my mornings in front of a fax machine, trying to send those faxes to a number of people. So I don't think I read any of those faxes back then, but so when I came here and sit in front of the boxes, my first reaction was, I'll try to read some of those correspondence. So I thought those mail responses at some point, when I started to read them and try to reconstruct certain moments in his life, I thought that it was the mail responses that really became kind of telling. I was not interested. I started to be less interested in what he was writing, but on the responses, the replies that he was getting, and the ones precisely that he had saved, which of course tell us a lot. I'm interested in subtle actions, in subtle gestures. So I think those are less conclusive, and they're potentially more honest. And as I approached the archive, I could not but narrow my search. You know, it's impossible. It's so big. So I was less interested about, you know, looking at business correspondence and more about artist correspondence. So I started to sort of keep narrowing my search. I started to think that maybe, you know, through this mirroring, through these other artist views and proposals and thoughts to him, we could get a little bit of a portrait of Szeemann. So, you know, I started to think that even, yes, a proposal to an exhibition is a reply. You know, the documentation of somebody's work is a reply. But on the other side, I have to say that actually I did a very, very arbitrary decision to sort of even more to try to nail, to narrow things down to this talk. Or not even to this talk, but actually I have to confess that I only managed to get to letter B. So I made the decision to, you know, to just look at artists whose last name starts with the letter B. Actually, the first intervention, the first thing that I read, if you remember, is a text written by Christian Boltanski. And it really, when I found it really sort of, I started to think that, you know, it did tell a lot about Harald Szeemann, not only, of course, about Boltanski, but also about Harald Szeemann. But I found really was a handwritten note, and that text was published eventually by Christian Boltanski. It was published in his first artist book, and he regards that text as the beginning of his serious career. This is Christian Boltanski. So what I read was a little bit of a mix of the text that Harald Szeemann had handwritten, which was a text that was not edited, and the final edit of the text. So thinking that potentially through those two versions, potentially something could be concluded. But anyway, I was not interested in that, but when I found this image, I thought this was very revealing. Being John Baldessari, an artist I really appreciate, and being a local artist, I'm sure a lot of you do like him. So, as I'll explain later, you know, I'm really into looking at other people's photographs and trying to find things there. So when I saw this photograph, I thought, you know, I really want to dig in and figure out why were they saying Baldessari. And this picture was taken during the installation of Harald Szeemann's dOCUMENTA 5 in 1972. So when I started looking around this thing, I found that the situation was actually some kind of party or some kind of bar evening. So I started to look for John Baldessari in the crowd, but I could not find him really, or at least there. What I could find was that there was Mario Mers there. And Mario Mers with a very sort of approachingly attitude. And so I started to keep looking for Baldassare in the crowd, but I couldn't find him. But I found that Mario Merz was a good dancer. I found that he had some good dance steps. But I could not find Baldassare. So when I went back to the photograph, I started to look more closely, and I realized that probably I deduced that it was actually Mario Merz who had written the name. And that's because of the fact that on top of the name there is some numbers. And those numbers are actually the Fibonacci numbers that he was using in the work he was actually installing at the time in the Rotunda Museum in the Frederiziano. This is the the work of Merz being installed. If you see, there's some tiny little lights in the curve wall, and those are the Fibonacci numbers, which are made out of neon. The neon, those numbers are also next to those frames. And there's Mario Merz, and there is Maritza, and there's other people which I couldn't recognize. And I thought, well, why are they laughing? And they were laughing because they were looking at this guy installing the motorbike. But anyway, Merz's last name does not really start with letter B. So I wonder if what had happened in that situation, in that bar, was Merz was just trying to explain his work to Baldassare, or simply he just wanted Baldassare to sit at the table. This is the piece that actually was shown by Baldassare in Kassel. We know of that for certain. It's called Choosing Green Beans from 1972. But anyway, I was not invited here to talk about Merz or Baldassare, so I better start getting into another story, which actually I'm supposed to talk about, which is a research I did a number of years ago related to Alighiero Boetti. And not only Alighiero Boetti, but his relation to Harald Szeemann. This is Alighiero in 1971, and this is also the year in which the story that I started to research started. At the time, I was really interested in Alighiero Boetti's, or the reason why I started to research this is the fact that I was very intrigued about a hotel that Alighiero Boetti had established and ran for 6 years in Afghanistan, in Kabul, in the 70s, precisely from 1971. At some point, actually, while living here in Los Angeles, I started to try and investigate what really had happened. There was very little information about this initiative of Boetti around. So while trying to nail down some facts, I started to analyze other people's photographs as well in order to understand what had happened in that place. And this I did because I could not go to Afghanistan at the time. And through a number of, many things happened in this research, but I discovered a number of interesting things. And one was the fact that the building was not on Chicken Street in Kabul, as the books normally said. I also discovered that the hotel was actually a house, much smaller than the books actually said. But more importantly was the fact that I found that the building where the hotel was actually had not been blown up by the war, as the artist had said. This is the way that we found, Carolyn and me, the building when we went in Kabul in 2011 on a research trip.
And it was beautiful.
It was fantastic. Am I getting too long?
Yeah, we have to run.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm not even half through it.
I know, it's crazy. But you're not even halfway?
No. Yeah, I'll try to summarize. So, it's a very, very long story, which I had shortened already. But what was interesting, or what I think I should talk about a little bit, is the fact that when we Carolyn and me decided that this research and the works that came out of it, little by little, those conclusions started to become works of mine. And by the time we started to decide that we will show this research as part of Documenta 13, we started to dig in a little bit more of what had happened. And one of the things that was very interesting to find was the fact that there was many other interesting things that we discovered through the correspondence between Boetti and Harald Szeemann. But one of the things that was very interesting for us was the fact that Afghanistan and Kabul and Documenta had a previous relationship that what we wanted to do in 2012. I'm going to try to rush there. This is the one hotel as we repair it a year after we went there for the first time. And this is a number of pictures to tell a little bit about the relationship between Szeemann and Boetti years before the Documenta from 71 started. This is Alighiero there sitting on the right, installing his piece in the When Attitudes Become Form show. This is the piece called Me Sunbathing in Turin, January 1969. This is another picture of it. This is Alighiero. And this is a piece that I made in 2012 in relation to two works that Boetti had proposed to Szeemann. One important thing in the correspondence between Szeemann and Boetti was the fact that there was two works that he proposed, and a big part of the conversation was in relation to what work to show in the document in 72. So the two works that were there was one that was implied the production of a metal plaque with his name, which was supposed to be with Boetti's name, which was supposed to be installed in front of the Federicianum, the museum. And the other was a work called Mapa, at the time called El Arazo, which was the first of a very long series of works that Boetti did with people, where women were embroidering a number of designs. The first series was called Mapa, and it implied the embroidery of a world map. This first world map he wanted to show in Documenta 72. This is a document I found in the archive, and this is a note from Boetti where he discusses being torn as a person, being torn between the two options. One showing the plaque, the metal plaque, and the other being the mapa, El Arazo is called in there. But I couldn't find any documentation of the works of Boetti in the archive. I can now say that nor here nor in the Documenta archive there is any picture of the work of Boetti.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I don't know what to say. This is other people in classification B in Documenta archive. That's Brothers, Boys, of course, James Lee Byers. There's many people in the B section. But anyway, in 71, this is a photograph that was also taken in 71 when they were trying to install things. So potentially, this is the place where Boetti was thinking about Afghanistan, Documenta. And this is the piece that we... Okay, I got the stop sign now. This is the piece that was actually finally shown. It's called Lavoro Postale. This is a section of it.
But you didn't find the traces of this being exhibited in the Documenta? No photograph here?
No photographs. There's no photographs.
And none anywhere else. So it remains a mystery.
No, we know that this Lavoro Postale was shown because it was...
Yeah, but we don't have any...
There's no photograph either. No. This is my installation there. This is the... so at some point we decided that we wanted to show also along my installation the correspondence between Szeemann and Boetti. And along that, we show the mappa for the first time, the way that Boetti had planned from 1972.
Yeah.
That's the map. Okay, I leave now.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. Yeah. I don't know how to continue with biographies, but very, very quickly, Pietro Rigolo is here. And he works at the Getty, and he is going to speak. That's it for now.
Thank you. I need to do this in 5 minutes, so please try to stick with me. It's going to be very fast. So I'm going to talk tonight about La Mamma, which is an unrealized project that Szeemann was planning in the mid-70s and was supposed to be the second part of a trilogy that would then become The Bachelor Machine, Monte Verità, and Der Hans zum Gesamtkunstwerk, tendency towards the Gesamtkunstwerk. And for me, I think it's a really interesting object of analysis because it allows to reflect on the period post-Documenta 5 from 1972 to 1978, more or less, which is a time of big uncertainty for Szeemann, in which he was faced with the problem of how to keep on working, actually, without any institutional affiliation. And in this period, we can see a partial withdrawal from contemporary art and like a sort of retreat, like Carolyn was saying. But at the same time, he started a very vivid and playful experiment with exhibition, with new exhibition formats. And it was a period of big turmoil, of course, also from a personal point of view. He was going through a divorce. He met a new love, and he set in a new region in Ticino. For quite a long time, he was living, his life was split between Bern, Ticino, and Italy. So, as we all know, Szeemann in 1969 decided to resign from Kunsthalle Bern, and in October he founded the Agentur für geistige Gastarbeit, which is a sort of fictive enterprise, a sort of office for exhibition making, in which he would play the role of all the different departments. He would be the employer and all the employees at the same time. And this is conceptually based on his previous theater experience as a one-man show manager, actor, and director. And the Agentur is a way to reflect on authorship in exhibition making and on the place for individual creativity, I think, within the cultural and commercial field. But soon in 1970, as we already know, came the assignment to be the artistic director of the Documenta 5, and so he actually had to he could push back the problem of how to make the agency work financially and what really mean to work independently as a curator. And actually, if we skip after Documenta 5, the first exhibition after Documenta is basically a zero-budget project. It's an exhibition about his grandfather that Carolyn already mentioned, and that was set up in his former apartment in Bern, and all the objects he was exhibiting were objects that he actually owned. So this exhibition can be seen as a sort of goodbye to Bern, a partially goodbye to the art world, and it's very clear from what he says that he really enjoyed spending months locked in the apartment playing with these objects, and he used to refer to this exhibition as the smallest one in the world after having done the biggest one in the world. And it's an exhibition with no contemporary art, of course, and it looks like it's an experiment on how to tell a story through objects and how objects can stand for an entire life and for a loved one who is no more. And this way of working with visual artifacts and their kind of transcendental powers, I would say, can be traced back actually in the Kunsthalle years in exhibitions like Ex Voto. This is an exhibition from 1964 in which Szeemann assembled hundreds of votive pictures spanning through various centuries. And it looks like he was interested in this because for him the Ex Voto functions as a sort of visual account, as a ratification of a communication with a higher entity, with the spiritual realm. Or if we think also about the exhibition Science Fiction of 1967, and again, the science fiction is, of course, a visual output of dreams and expectations about the future. So in different ways, this exhibition has all to do with desire, with an aspiration, and with something that still has to happen. And of course, also in Documenta 5, in the section in the Neue Galerie, we have talked about a little bit briefly. That section was, again, somehow about what images mean, what images can do, or what images can make you do, actually, and their relationship with reality. And, oh, this is Szeemann during science fiction. And this complex system of art objects and everyday life object and artifact with different statuses will inform also the trilogy from 1975 to 1978, which aimed to analyze a complex system of trends and themes in early 20th century culture, but at the same time, it also presented the public with a metaphor for different possible roles that art can play in society and on a personal psychological level. The Bachelor Machine, in particular, the first one, in this showed Szeemann, through the reading of Michel Carouge, was trying to trace back a mechanical metaphor running through the beginning of the century culture, particularly in many writers and artists, especially surrealists and Dada. And the exhibition was grounded on the idea of the machine as a symbol for artistic production and the image of the artist as a bachelor, who basically, in order to escape time and death, seeks refuge in his art practice and decide not to engage anymore with the outside world. And in this sense, La Mamma, the second part of the trilogy, would have been the exact opposite. Szeemann was thinking of the maternal symbology as a way to analyze an opposite trend, the refusal of art in order to open up to life, basically, to embrace one's own mortality. And here there's a little floor plan I found when the archive was still in Switzerland, in which it looks like Szeemann is trying to figure out how the exhibition would look like in Magazzini del Sale, which is the place where he was setting up the Bachelor Machine during the 1976 Venice Biennale. But actually, it would have been an exhibition for the most part without art, and not an exhibition about women artists. Actually, it's an exhibition about the idea of a feminine goddess, about maternity, and about different issues regarding the body of women, like, for example, probably divorce, abortion, contraception. And actually, a big part of the exhibition would have been about the refusal of motherhood. Szeemann was thinking about this idea of women who decided not to be mothers in order to invest their maternal energy into something else. And this something else is often either a political and civic stance and engagement for women's rights, or the engagement in a spiritual quest, like in the case of many psychics that he was planning to show, like Emma Kunz and Mira Alfassa, or theosophical leaders like Elena Blavatsky or Annie Besant. So, of course, I think that a factor that could have been significant in the decision not to focus, not to pursue this exhibition and to set it aside was the fact that the exhibition looks like it's basically grounded on the assumption that women don't need art because they're completely accomplished by the gift of life, which is, of course, it's a very problematic idea, but I think that we have to think about this, about the Bachelor Machine and La Mamma, as actually a system of opposite stances, like two psychological drives that would have found a synthesis in a third exhibition. So like two polarities that the artist in Szeemann's mind is always confronted to, like focusing on art and refusing life, or otherwise accepting life and not caring anymore about your art, basically. And this solution, this reintegration of these polarities, would have been the third show, which was supposed to be entitled Il Sole, the Sun, and was a show about the idea of a male God, but not connected with the patriarchal Christian idea of God. And Szeemann, of course, had in mind Saint Francis. Pointing to an egalitarian society in harmony with nature, and an idea of an artist who is finally reintegrated into society and becomes a sort of guide, someone who brings life to society. And of course, you can't stop thinking about Joseph Beuys when you read this thing about Il Sole. So another very brief point that I wanted to make is the fact that financial difficulties really informed also the decision not to pursue La Mama project anymore. The Bachelor Machine was a really complex exhibition to set up and to figure out financially. Szeemann got a sponsorship from a German insurance who withdrew the sponsorship 1 year after, before the opening. So Szeemann was forced to get a personal loan from a bank and to organize a very complex touring system for the show in many, many museums who would pay a rent. So at the end, the project was successful in the sense that he didn't lose any money, but it was extremely risky and stressing. And from the early 70s, as we all know, he moved to Ticino, and he got more and more interested on Monte Verità, and we would know something more from Lea's presentation. And I think that in Monte Verità, he was able to find some of the same topics, but he was also able to present them in a much more coherent and structured framework, which was easier to be presented to a museum, basically, to an institution. And the Monte Verità, indeed, was sponsored by Kunsthaus Zurich. From 1981, Szeemann became independent permanent curator there, which was it's a kind of strange oxymoric title, but he was basically reintegrated within the institutional framework. Yeah, well, the last thing, I mean, and what is interesting, though, is that Szeemann kept on thinking about this project all through the 90s and the early 2000s. And, for example, Una Szeemann used to say that he was really willing to resign from, to retire from exhibition making in 2006 and devote himself just to the reordering of the archive and to finally make this exhibition. So I think that's it, and we should move on. Right? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So an excursus in a trilogy of exhibitions that were not all made, as a gap in the period between the dOCUMENTA and the Monte Verità. So thank you all for your patience. It's amazing because there are so many people here to speak from so many different perspectives. We have one last speaker, which is Lea Porsager, the artist, who did a very, very specific project in dOCUMENTA 13 that concerned the Monte Verità. So I won't describe her biography again to save time, but welcome her. And hopefully, if there's any minutes left in the system here after that, there'll be time for one question, or hopefully. In the meantime, Lea is welcome.
No. Okay, I was just asked if I could maybe shorten it down, and after all these really amazing presentations, I think I can do that. I would try at least. But first, thank you, Carolyn, for inviting me, and thanks to the Getty Research Institute. Okay, so my presentation will focus on some terms that were coined by Harald Szeemann in his book about Monte Verità, which is the mountain of truth. Concepts that became cruxes for my dOCUMENTA work, the Anatta experiment. So behind me you will see a mismatch of images from the archive and from the Monte Verità period, and from like leftover material from my own experiment. So just a little background of Monte Verità, which is like a historical hill that is located in Ascona, Switzerland, in the early 1900s. This hill served as this lodestone for spiritual rebellion, attracting anarchists, free love advocates, dadaists, and theosophists. We heard that already. And I would say that the diversity of these different voices and influences on Monte Verità has resulted in what I would say like a many-voiced document, and the only common denominator seems to be the fact that Mondevita attracted people, those ideas, anarchic and strange, found little nurturing, found little nurturing in the established society. And Harald Szeemann made us remember this very special place when he decided to collect the historical document and make an exhibition on this site. And then I have a small quote, roughly translated from German, from Harald Szeemann's book. He writes that a love story started in Tessent, the desire of not conceptualizing La Mama and Il Sole for a museum, but instead thinking of it as a landscape and whatever possible on a holy mountain, Mondevita, the sum of ideology in this midst of a maternal landscape. So that's actually what Pietro is talking about, that somehow the son and the mother became these figures at Mondevita. And then he has this other picture that I was very fascinated by, which is this multi-breasted goddess that appeared to him in the night as this kind of goddess figure. And that was then a picture that I took forward in my project. So in 1978, Harald Szeemann, he puts this figure, this goddess figure that he decided to call Strukturmutter in his catalog to structure his whole archive. So he had like one breast for sexual revolution and one breast for Lebensreform and one breast for dance and art and so on. So I started to think about what is it with this mother figure that is so present, and when I then went into the archive in Bellinzona, because parts of the Mondevita archive is actually not here at the Getty, but in Bellinzona, I started to then see that this mother figure was very present in the sense that many of the male figures that were there, historical figures, had problems with their fathers and believed that the mother was this kind of figure of the revolution. Yeah. So as I mentioned, the experiment that I did ultimately found its crux within Harald Szeemann's archive and this puzzling Strukturmutter, which I really think it's a perfect name, Strukturmutter. And the research trips that I took to the mountain, together with Carolyn and together with my partner and together with my collaborator, confirmed to me that I needed to do an actual lived experiment in order to awaken this nibbled structure hardwired for this Lebensreform, this life reform that was very present at the mountain. Because the question and the worry for me was always how to actually do something to this place, this very historical and loaded place. So I just wanted to, in a way, get rid of this kind of nostalgic reenactment of the utopian past. So in the late summer of 2011, I invited 7 close friends to join me for an experiment at the Casa Annata, Mondevita's principal building. And as luck would have it, we slipped in moments just before the building had to go through like major renovation. And I looked at the name of the house, Annata, which in Buddhism refers to a state of not I, not mine. So for us, and here I'm talking about my friends and me that did the experiment, Casa Annata became this kind of scene for a week-long vertical drop into tantric laws and processes normally obscured by our productivity. So, like the experiment was thereby then rooted in this house that in a way became a mother, the Strukturmutter, and that house allowed us to, in a way, bypass what Harald Szeemann would maybe have called the individual mythology and thereby give way to Annata, not I, not mine. Szeemann used this graphical representation of the sun and its rays for Mondevita poster and for his book. So the orb and the sun appeared as this magnetic poem landscape, and the rays appeared as written statements referring to different movements and ideas. So in a way, there was two figures at Moderator, and the one was the Strukturmutter, this nibbled woman, and then the other was the breast. The other was the sun and its rays. And according to Szeemann, Moderator was quite literally smack in the middle of a very potent magnetic field. So because of that, he said that this strange geographical place also attracted strange people. So he made this kind of very literally connection. Maybe that's why that Moderator was also known as this Bermuda Triangle of the mind. And definitely, I started to imagine this, like Szeemann's goddess figure was somehow like sunbathing in these revolutionary rays of the sun and nudity. Okay, I have to wrap up already. Oh my God. Okay, then I will try to see if I can say something more about why I think Szeemann was important. And I think for me to go into this archive and to see how he has actually had this ability to go into things and to deepen his material and to relate them in new ways. I think that was what inspired me to think in this vertical realm. So to invest oneself and to be curious and to put oneself in trouble and stay with it, to say it with the Donny Haraway term. And I think that is what I really appreciated with his collection. It was like trying to trace these different lines of thoughts. And here there was this very, for me, parallel connection to the way Carolyn is working. It's like it's a way of thinking. It's a way of worlding, where different concepts of time are suddenly entangled. Again, a thing or a word Carolyn used to talk about. And I think that is really specific about Harald Szeemann's, at least the Moderator archive that I was close to, and I think that's very important that we find other ways to perceive this very strange world that we are in, and I think that was also what they did at Moderator. They actually tried to do something else, and then suddenly it was only an archive and nothing was lived, and that was also why I wanted to go there and actually do something, so it's not only static. There was already an archive. I could do another archive, but I would probably not be as good as them to do that anyway. So somehow my experiment was very much to, in a way, transform Harald Szeemann's Strukturmutter and try to see what happens when you start to live it. And then, of course, it transmutes and it somehow ends up as something completely different because it's somehow shaken by this reality of being lived. So all these utopian ideas are, suddenly not maybe possible in the sense of at least this kind of romantic idea of the utopian. So if I should really stop, then I stop. Okay, but thank you.
Okay, I'm very thankful that you were here. And thankful that you have so much to say still. And I'm told that we have no time for questions. However, we have no time for questions. The lights will go off. There was too much put here on the table. So it's a bit of a pity, but I hope that that we can take this not as a discussion, which it was not. It was more like a concentrated conference of sorts, and with many different disparate parts. And I take it fundamentally at this point as a ritual homage to Harald Szeemann, whose ghost is here. And I'm sure he is happy that 3 artists came to look at his papers and to speak about him. And he's happy that we are here. And all of the criticality, because we all know there's so much to discuss. You know, the hero, the heroic curator, the problems with that, the problems of the relations between curatorial and artistic work, all of that, taking it apart, I hope will be done by the many researchers that are here in their studies and in their papers that will come over the next years, and possibly to see this as a seed for another real conference. Okay, thank you.